Welcome to Huff-In-Stuff podcast, where we have fun discussing board games, card games, and entertainment for the casual gamer. Brought to you by the Southwest Valley Gaming Group. We invite you to visit our website at huffandstuffpodcast.webs.com. And here are your hosts, Rob Huffin and Han Tiemens.
It is January 26, 2014, episode number 5. Fill it for me.
That's right, we are here today talking about filler games and why they are in our future and why some of them were in our past. You know, I'm flying a little bit solo today. Hans isn't here, but instead I have asked a friend of mine, Ken. Welcome.
Hey, everyone.
Yeah, Ken's here. He's going to help me out with this topic. And one of the reasons why I thought he would be great to be in this segment or in this particular episode is because he is, for all my buddies, he's the one who's got all the fillers, and they're usually popular ones. So he just has this tendency to get the good ones. I don't know why.
I can blame my wife for that, to be honest. A lot of the times we'll go to whatever GameStop or game store or whatever, and she'll see a game and be like, hey, that looks like fun, and then we'll pick it up and it'll be a hit.
Funny you should say it, because my wife always has that tendency to kind of know, too, about what games are what is interesting to her, and they just have a tendency for everyone else to like it. Wonder what that's about.
Yeah. Well, any game that I can get my wife to play, I do everything I can to get it.
True. 2013 exploded with filler games than ever before. I don't know about you, Ken, but in my opinion, filler games are becoming more and more popular. Why do you think that is?
Oh, that would definitely be just because of the limited time frame. I mean, everybody's rushing and going and doing stuff constantly. So,
right.
I mean, if you can get together for a quick game, it's more appealing. Plus, I know some people have limited or lack thereof attention span. So, rather than get them into a brain burner that's going to last 2 or 3 hours.
Right. Filler games usually play just about everybody. So this part is true. Before we go on, though, let's move on to our next segment.
Guys, now it's time to talk about what we've been playing recently.
That's right, Elise. Now we'll be talking about what we've been playing lately. I've been looking at this game for a while, ever since I heard about it, but I actually recently picked up Steam Park by, I think it's Asmodee who published it, and I have to say it's probably one of the best games I've played in a while.
Really?
It's got so many different things. It's got dice rolling. It's got things to limit that randomness of the dice. It's got building. It's also got an excellent steampunk theme with like little steam-powered robots and buildings and things of that sort. And actually, I think it just released recently here in the U.S. I know it was the big hotness over at Essen.
Right, it was a European game for sure. This game, for whatever reason, doesn't seem to quite appeal to me because the artwork, and I know I have a tendency to be kind of weird. People are like, what do you care about the artwork if the gameplay is so good? What do you care? I don't know, for some reason I don't like it. I don't know why. Maybe I'm just being shallow here.
Oh, we'll have to pull it out sometime and let you play.
Maybe if I try it, I'll really get into it, huh?
The aesthetic can definitely be a turn-off, especially with some games more than others, but it's definitely one that I suggest everyone to try at least once.
Right. Let me jump in with one I've been playing. We borrowed Stone Age from a friend of mine, Chad, for some of you that know Chad. And he and Donna, my other friend, seem to have a ton of games. So I'm like, oh, great, instead of buying all these games, I'll start borrowing them and see if I really like them. And then that way. So we borrowed an older one, which is Stone Age. I believe it came out in 2008 or something like this.
I'm not sure, but I know it's been around for a while.
Yeah, it's like 2008 or something like this, but it feels kind of new. And maybe it's because I've not been in the hobby very long. It's a really good game, and the more I play this game, the more I love this game. Obviously, it's a light Euro game. It's not too heavy. My wife seemed to not like it so much. She had a tendency to like some of the others that we have played recently. But I love how Stone Age, the artwork is awesome, and the components are awesome. I love how the wood really looks like a little piece of wood, and all the little other pieces are just really nice. I believe it's Z-Man Games produced it, right?
I'm not sure. I've
I
heard
think
about
they
it.
did, and bang up job, boy. All the components, all the pieces, and it flows pretty nicely. If I find this used, I'm definitely going to buy it. I have a tendency to like used games myself.
Yeah, I've heard about it, but I've never actually seen it played, or I've seen it in a couple places, but just never had the time or the money to invest in
You've
it.
never played Stone Age?
Nope.
Oh, well, maybe we'll borrow it from Chad next time we'll play it, because he's the man who's got it. What other games have you been playing recently? Because I know we're in January. Christmas just passed us, so everyone's got these new games now.
Unfortunately, I don't get the time to go out to the shop every Thursday because of work schedules and whatnot. But this past game night that we had on a Sunday, I got a chance to pull out Zularetto again, and I've always loved Zularetto. My wife and I actually started playing it on the iPad because there's an iPad app for it, and she wanted the hard copy of it, so I scoured the internet and found a copy, and I love the fact that now I can bring it to more people because it is a great game.
You know, I was just about to jump in there and say that I was blown away how good this game was. You had said something like it had won some awards.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was, I think, the 2007 or 2008 Spiel des Jahres.
Yeah, if you're right on that one. I can't keep track of all these games with all their awards, but man, that's a great game, and it's hard to explain what about it I liked. It just seemed like a solid game. I mean, obviously, it won an award. Although I have to say that some of these awards on some of these games, they get these awards, I'm wondering who paid these people, because it's not that good of a game. But this game is really good. I was kind of blown away, to be honest with you, how good it was.
I think the reason that I like it so much is just that there's certain things that you can do. There's no right or wrong way to play this game. Everybody can go into this game and play it a completely and totally different way.
Sure.
And there's ways within the game to kind of cut down on the randomness of the game.
Sure.
But that same mechanic that cuts down on the randomness kind of makes it so that other people can swoop in and kind of gank you.
When you're playing that game, what is nice about it, what is really cool, is that you can win by many different paths, and that's always a good sign for a good game. People are gaining points through various means. That's always cool, because if someone's got a real handle on something and you're like, wow, I'm falling behind, I need to figure out another way to make some points here, that's always a good thing with a game. The other game my wife and I bought recently, it's called The Adventures. I almost forgot there for a minute. For the Fantasy Flight holiday sale, thanks to Hans, he turned me on to that sucker. We had bought this game, and at first I was a little bit excited about it. I wasn't quite sure, and then we played it through once. I was a little bit, I'm not so sure about it. It's the second of the series. I guess there's 2 or 3 of them, and this one is Horus the Temple. It's like Egyptian theme.
Okay, I mean, I've not heard anything about it, to be honest.
The first one was it was like, if you remember at the beginning of the Indiana Jones movie, where he's running through that Incan temple and there's that big rolling stone that comes after him. That's like on the first game they have that, where you go into the Incan temple. This one's supposed to be like you're in an Egyptian pyramid or something, and that the blocks are falling down, and it's this random thing, and you just pull them out of a bag, these big blocks, and they're like big, bulky. Fantasy Flight, they make pretty good products most of the time.
They've been bumping up their quality lately.
Yeah, and it seems like more and more that's how it is, right? But anyways, what was neat about the game, what really made it for me, was the fact that it felt like I was in Egypt and all these things were happening to me. Like, scorpion would come out, or cobra would hit me, and then I would have these wounds, and I'm like stumbling out. I'm like stumbling out. I'm like, help me, somebody. And so, anyways, it's a really fun game, and it had a real nice feel. And I think when a game does that, when it sucks you in and makes you feel like you're there or you're experiencing something similar to Arkham Horror, when you feel like you're part of that story, that's fun. When games, I should say, are really fun.
And any game that can really pull you in and keep you in with that story like that, I think, is definitely worth the time.
Definitely. So, is there any other games that you have been playing recently? I mean, it's after Christmas. Everyone's got all these new games.
Now, the last one that I've been getting to the table a lot, both with my in-laws and at a board game night, was Kingsburg. And
oh yeah,
that was a Fantasy Flight game release as well. And that was
Fantasy Flight, really?
That was Fantasy Flight.
Oh, okay.
And I mean, everybody I see that's played the game always tells me, get the expansion. It makes it that much better. But the game by itself, I absolutely adore. Basically, you're rolling dice and allocating those dice to certain advisors to the king, and they give you either resources or allow you to look at something, or it's a very complex, but it's simple to teach, but really makes you think.
Yeah, I would say it's accessible. Like, it really draws you in. But there are deeper things that are going on within it. Once you get, like, you're pulled in, once you're there, you're like, okay, if I put my guy, I'm building, because I was going along a track. I saw at the end there was, I think it was called the Cathedral at the top of the board of the. I think it was it the player board?
Yeah, it was the
you
player
have your own
board.
little player board. For those of you who haven't played it, you have your own little player board, and there's different tracks you can invest in, I would say, almost, right? It's almost like investing, right?
Yeah, definitely.
And you build towards that end of the track, because that's where the most points will get you. And that top one had a ton of points. So I looked at it when we first broke it out. I'm like, I probably want to head for that. But the problem is, I didn't have anything in military. So as soon as the hordes of whatever started coming after us, and it builds up, by the way. So if you haven't played it, toward the end of the game, you're getting the enemies that are hitting the kingdom get harder and harder. I think is the way you would say it. And so by the end, all my buildings, like 2 or 3 of my buildings, I don't think it was 2. It was just my 2 most important buildings that would have won me the game. It totally got destroyed, and so I was out of it.
It can be a little bit unforgiving in the later stages of the game, but the thing that I loved about it, and I mean, I looked into it many, many months ago, let's say by going to a site for the Polyhedron Spire, not to name any other websites or podcasts, but... And I saw this game, and I just immediately fell in love with it. And it's another one of those games that, there's not just one set way to victory, kind of like with Catan, where you have to get so many victory points, and there's only 1 or 2 ways you can do that. With this, there's countless ways, there's countless tracks and paths that you can take.
Right. With a few more plays of that game, if you do come again on a Thursday night, I'd like you to bring it again. Because I think that game, it was a hit with everybody.
Yeah.
Everyone who was playing it around the table was like, whoa, this is a cool game. And I think it's very, like you were saying, like you and I were talking about earlier about this game, it's very accessible. To be honest with you, I was quite surprised. Because when I first saw it, I was like,
Yeah, the artwork's nice, but the boards really aren't much to look at. But once you sit down and you read the rules, or somebody teaches you the rules, it's like, wow, this is a really solid game.
Yeah, and it's one of those games that is funny because when you first it's like many titles, and you could also say it's about a lot of music. When you first sit down, you're like, you're not impressed, but the more you listen to it, it's like, wow, you really start loving it. And that's, I think, in the long run, that's good music or it's good gaming, is when that game really, over time, it just gets better. That's like good.
Yeah, any game that can leave a lasting impression on you and make you want to play it again. I mean, I can't remember all the times I've pulled out Dominion with new players, and as soon as we finish that first game, they're like, okay, let's play it again.
It's true. Having a game do that for you is honestly kind of rare, because there's so many games out there that aren't very good, I have to say. Out of the hundreds of games that are made every year, there's only really, I would say, even like between 1% and 3% that are really worth having. And that's too bad that has to be that way, but that's why we're doing this, right?
Yep.
While we're in this hobby, we are interested in the good ones, right? So
and
anyways.
Always do your research, too.
Right.
Don't just say, oh, this game looks good, unless you have a wife who's like that. Then if they want the game and it looks good, then by all means, go for it.
And now, it's time for Word of the Day.
That's right, Elise. We are on to Word of the Day. And this episode, we're going to be talking about mass market game. Now, some of my fellow hobbyists use this word in a kind of a derogatory way, like they're elitist or something, that a mass market game. But okay, let me give you the definition before we move on. Mass market game is often sold in mass market retailers like Walmart or Toys R Us or Target. These manufacturers are like Hasbro or Mattel. In the past, there was Parker Brothers. I believe they're out of business. Milton Bradley, who are out of business now. And some of the examples of those games are Monopoly, Risk, Scrabble, Uno, these kind of games. And to be honest with you, most of the people in the hobby poo-poo these games, and which is kind of sad, actually, because Let me tell you, most people out in the world have played those games, have played Monopoly, Risk, Scrabble. And let me tell you, when I was a kid, that was my first introduction to gaming, really, was those games. What do you think, Ken?
Yeah, I definitely agree with you there, but I mean, if you look at all these people who snub their noses to these mass market games, I'm willing to bet that 95% or more of them started out their gaming career with this, and it's just they had this drive or hunger or desire to get out and play
more.
Better games.
Yeah,
and I mean, coming from northwestern Pennsylvania, you're snowed in all winter.
Right.
So that's, unless you're watching television all day, you're playing board games or puzzles or
you're playing
something.
cards or something like that, right? So I think that it's fine to use the word mass market game when we're talking about, games like Monopoly or Risk. That's fine. You could argue that these games are a gateway games, really. They're gateway games into the hobby.
And they're also games that, like, none of them really have extremely complex rules. So say that you're having a family outing or it's Christmas dinner or whatever and you're done and there's nothing to do and you pull out a board game. And I mean, these mass market games are games that anybody can sit down and play. I mean, how difficult is it to chuck a couple of dice playing Yahtzee?
Right.
But I also feel that the word or the name has kind of evolved, especially with new YouTube shows that are coming out. I know that Tabletop at one point had a contract with Target where whatever game they showed on their show they were now putting out at Target, and Target all of a sudden had games like Settlers of Catan and Suro and the Star Trek version of Settlers, and even like Dominion and the Game of Thrones card game I've seen there now too.
Really? And that was at Target?
That's at Target, yeah.
Wow. I need to take a trip to Target and check this out.
I still remember the first time I walked in there. I think it was both at a Target and then later on the same day at a Toys R Us. They had copies of Pandemic.
Really?
And I'm
Toys
just
R
like,
Us?
yeah. And
wow.
It was right after the second edition came out and they still had the first edition. And because it was a first edition,
away.
the price was cut in half.
Wow. That is cool. I'm sorry, I'm just getting all excited all of a sudden. I don't know about you and you guys out there listening, but I get excited by that sort of thing because personally I think the hobby needs to grow. And I think that's one of our goals with this podcast, is that we're trying to spread the word in a way to this great hobby.
And the hobby definitely is growing. I mean, every year, every day even that I go to places, and I remember 5 or 10 years ago mentioning a game like Settlers of Catan and nobody knowing what that is.
Right.
And yet within the past few years I say that and people go, hey, that's the game they were playing on Parks and Rec. Because there was a certain episode.
Did they have that on that show?
There was an episode where they were doing everybody's bachelor party.
Really?
And the one character, the only thing he wanted to do was sit down with a bunch of his buddies, have a couple beers, and play Settlers of Catan.
Wow, that's really interesting.
I mean, granted, he was obviously an avid gamer and totally wiped the board with everybody else, but it was just the experience. And actually, That's kind of like what my bachelor party was. We sat around, we played a couple board games, drank a couple beers.
Neat. That's cool. And the important thing, hey, we've talked about this in our first episode or two, that board games, the beauty of board games is that it brings people together. And the real beauty is when you can get people who are non-geeks or non-hobbyists in as well and kind of socializing. And that's the best part of board gaming. And I'll tell you, before I sort of got into board gaming, I was a little bit bummed because before that I played a lot of hockey and I had tons of friends in California. I mean, we've only been here in Arizona for about 5 years now. Everyone we know is in California. And so I say, well, gee, I'd like to have other friends. Board games is a great way to do that. And when I found the Thunderbird group, which is the Imperial Outpost, how I met Ken here, it really helped me. It helped my social life.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you there. I mean, that's one of the main reasons why I love board gaming so much, is it really is, for lack of a better term, a social lubricant. I mean, I've seen some of the quietest, most introverted people I've ever met sit down and play a board game, and they're screaming their head off at the people across the table.
That is cool. That is really cool. And I never thought about that, but you're exactly right.
And that along with just getting to know people and seeing how the way that you think contrasts or coexists with the way that they think when you play a game, because these games, there's normally not just one way to win it. Yeah. There's several different ways to achieve one goal, and everybody always has a different strategy.
Sure. And again, going back to our main word of the day, mass market games have a purpose. They have a real purpose. And Hasbro, I say kudos to you guys, because not only have they kept board games going and when there were times where they were kind of it before hobby games were big, and when Parker Brothers and Milton Bradley, all those guys were kind of failing, and Avalon Hill even, all those guys were kind of failing. They still hung around, and Mattel has dipped their toe into the gaming market, and they've kind of, in some ways, helped keep this whole thing alive.
Yeah, definitely kudos to Hasbro. Now if we could just get them to reprint HeroScape.
It's true. There's quite a few titles that are out there that these mass market guys have been producing that they need to redo. There's some really good ones out there. It's just maybe they need to repackage it maybe. Then that would be cool. Like have some new, give it a new coding or new art on it, and maybe it would sell again, because that's their biggest thing. They sit there and they look at numbers, they go over all. I heard this interview with someone that used to work for Hasbro, and what he was saying was really interesting. One of his things was they're a different type of gaming manufacturer because they are directly linked with the guys who run the numbers, the business guys, and the accountants, I guess you could say. And they sit there and they say, well, gee, this one is in so many stores and it's making this much cash, and they run the numbers and they crunch it all. And they say, well, if it's not making, it's gone, right? And it's like, wow. And they're very intense when it comes to their business structure, what they're putting out there in the marketplace. So again, a lot of these older games, they're not making it, and they're with Hasbro. It's going to be gone probably.
And now it's time for our main topic.
That's right, Elise. We are now on our main topic. Today, we are going to talk about filler games. Now, filler game is a noun, and it's a game with very simple rules and an extremely short playing time. Usually this type of game is frequently used between heavier games, and that's why they're also considered light games. What is your knowledge, Ken, of filler games?
My knowledge of filler games is actually quite extensive, but I think that this definition is a little bit vague, because what might be a short period of time for one person might be 15 minutes. For another person, that might be 45 minutes.
Sure.
But for me, personally, I think a filler game falls into not only that time frame, but something that's simple to teach, easily accessible, really draws people in. I mean, I've never really played a filler game that hasn't really sucked people into it, even if it's something as simple as, say, like, hey, that's my fish. I still think it's funny seeing people rant and rave and scream over penguins and fish.
It's true. I mean, I would agree with you on the time frame. Technically, when people in the industry or in the hobby talk about filler games, they're basically talking about a game that is not the headliner, so to speak. Like if you're ever to go to a comedy club, one of the things you'll find is they'll have 3 or maybe 4 people, giving their stand-up for the night, and the headliner is usually much longer. I think it's similar with people's evenings. People want to get in a few games to get their fun juices going, and they usually filler games is what they use to do that with, I believe.
Oh, my wife and I were actually talking about this last night, and I would mention a game that I feel is a filler game.
Yeah.
But that's not a filler game, like Dominion. I mean, yeah, the first or second play of Dominion might take a little bit longer, but once you know what you're doing and you got the general gist, you can get those hands and those cards out as quick as you can and get them done in like half an hour.
Sure. Now, before we go on, let me throw out some examples here, just for those of you who may not know. For Sale, No Thanks, Ink and Gold, Coloretto, Hey, That's My Fish, Lost Cities, Can't Stop, Ingenious, Liar's Dice, Dixit, Jaipur, I'm not saying that right, I don't think.
I have no clue how that's pronounced.
Fairy Tale, Hive, Cloud9. These are some of the games that, of course, I could go on and on and on. There's so many games out there. But these are sort of the games that are considered filler games. Now, one of the things that when I was looking at these games, one of the things that question would come up is, like, what is a filler game and what is the appeal of these games? Well, one of the things I said was the appeal is that they're quick. So let's say you had a couple of gamers at work and they wanted to get one out at, lunchtime. That's a perfect time. Filler game fits that perfectly.
And it's also, again, it's that the rules aren't overly complicated. So, I mean, I've done it before where I've brought in these tiny little filler games to, like, my grandparents' house for Christmas or Thanksgiving, and everybody's sat down, I've taught the game in 5 minutes, and then everybody's played the game. So it's easily accessible to not just gamers, but people who aren't very familiar with the hobby.
Right. A filler game, technically, the good ones. Like, we played last week For Sale. Now, had you played that before?
I hadn't played that before. I'd heard of it, and I've seen it, but I've never actually sat down to play it, and I was impressed.
Yeah, it was a great game, and I'm like, okay, that's going on my list, because it was that good.
Yeah.
What was cool about it is that it had a great kind of vanilla theme to it. I know some people will be like, no, it's not vanilla. It kind of is. I mean, everyone can understand, buying and selling property, and that's what For Sale is, kind of. And it's cards. It was a great game. I enjoyed it, and what was really interesting about that game is that there was a little bit of bluffing going on, and that's always fun.
Yeah, and I mean, with a game like that, you said that it's kind of vanilla, but what more is there to real estate, really? I mean, you're buying houses, you're selling houses at more than you bought it for.
True.
So
it's true.
It fit the theme fairly well, even though it wasn't some like massive theme.
Right. I do have to say that it, like a lot of games, if you've got sort of like No Thanks. No Thanks is a really popular one, and every time that I listen to people who are in the industry and are on podcasts or on YouTube, they're all the time talking about No Thanks. It's for good reason, because it's sort of like you can play that with grandma, and it's not overly complex. Like you said, I think the key, one of the keys, of course, is speed, but this whole rules thing that you had brought up earlier, that if the rules are too complicated or too crazy, then it won't be good for a filler.
Yeah, and the rules have to be very cut and dry, black and white. There can't be anything where, well, what if I do this? Oh, hold on, let me look in the rules.
Sure. And I think that's key. I think speed and accessibility, and I think accessibility is sort of something that comes from those other two aspects of the game, like, theme or ease of use. I think that accessibility is something that'll make a game sell. One of the things that I think is sort of important to understand is a lot of the industry are taking stock of games like Love Letter, trying to tailor a lot of these new games that are coming out to be shorter with maybe an interesting theme or whatever, and packaging. I think one of the things that makes Love Letter so appealing is its packaging. I think what they've done with that game is made it interesting for women too.
Yeah, and I mean, the theme with Love Letter is great. And it's so simple to the point. It's such a simple game where anybody could go out and they could reskin the theme on this. I've seen things online where people are doing like a Game of Thrones theme for Love Letter.
That'd be interesting to see. The last time I was listening to some of the manufacturers, the gentlemen that were involved with games, they were like, this is where our gaming lines are going, is in the filler department. I mean, that's kind of where it's going, lighter, quicker games, because I think you had said it earlier. One of the things that is affecting the hobby is people's times. Because we have families, we have emergencies that came up, like you had a week or two ago. You had car problems.
Yeah, car issues and then getting sick, and it's just been a snowball effect.
Car problems. And so that all cuts down on your time, your free time. So if you've got a game that you can break out with the wife, I know you have a wife, I do too, and it's something we can break out, knock out a game or two, and then go to bed. Like, let's say you've had a long day, but you want to interact with your wife on something fun. That's a perfect thing to do right before bed, or right before you go to bed, or whatever. Or before you have to go to work, maybe even. You can get up and play it then. That's the beauty of that. There's no way you're going to be breaking open Arkham Horror after work. I mean, it's just
I even mention Arkham Horror, and my wife runs for the hills.
It's true. Definitely not for everybody, okay? I mean, don't get me wrong. I like Arkham Horror a lot. It's just why I say it is because it's the complete opposite of what a filler game is, right?
Yeah.
It's so involved. There's so much to it. There's so many components. And I think that's something else we could potentially say, is that the elements involved with a filler game has a tendency to be simpler. In that fact, the physical pieces, like, there's less to it usually they're cards.
Yeah, they're normally cards or tiny bits, and I mean, I even have some filler games that they take longer to set up than they do to play. A good example of that is, hey, That's My Fish. I mean, you've got all these little tiles, and you have to set them up in a certain way, and a certain tile can't touch a different tile, and it takes longer to set up than it does to actually play the game.
Right. And I have yet to play that, but I want to. That's one of the next things I'd like to play again. Like, I'd like to play Kingsburg again that you have. Of course, we talked about that, and some other things. But yeah, that's my fish I'd definitely like to play. In fact, Zularedo, I think we had talked about earlier, you could almost say, if you got good at that, that might even be almost right on the edge of a filler game as well.
The number of players really impacts how long or short that game is. My wife and I can sit down and play a game of Zularedo on the iPad in 20 minutes.
Oh, iPad. Okay, I didn't know they had one for the iPad. I should have known better because almost everything's not almost everything, but a lot of board games in our industry is on the iPad these days, or the iOS. Excuse me. What is the other reason that a lot of game manufacturers are being pushed towards filler games?
Because it's a game that it doesn't. There's normally not a lot of components. Like you said, it's normally cards or dice, or there might be a couple more chits involved. But it's a very cheap game to produce. So it's a very cheap game to put out there. Right. I mean, it's not going to be a $60, $70, $80 game like Agricola or Caverna.
Right.
I think the pocket version of Hey, That's My Fish is retailing for like $15 now.
Right. I'll tell you, that is a very attractive thing when it comes to gaming. Because cost, how many of these games that I've seen on Kickstarter that's like, $100 or more?
Yeah, like the Mega Man game that just closed. They wanted like $120 just to get the core game.
Wow, that's too much. That's way too much. I mean, to be honest with you, one of the reasons why I'm such a big proponent of used games is because I just don't have the money to be buying all these games. I mean, I got a family, I've got a mortgage. I can't be spending that kind of coin on my hobby. Even though in the past I have, when I've had hobbies where I was shelling out bucks, and I just can't do that anymore.
Well, hockey equipment, for example.
Right.
I mean, granted, it's not like you're a kid and still growing and having to get new equipment every year, but you're still shelling out about $400 for that equipment.
Right, and there were times when I was involved with hockey that I was even trying to get used equipment there too, because it was like, it's expensive. I mean, my fees were expensive enough, to be in the leagues were too expensive. So I was always trying to cut corners there too. But yeah, I think cost is one of the reasons it's driving. I mean, if everyone in the hobby is going to buy Love Letter because it's $12, $15 maximum, they're still making a ton of cash, because think about all those games like Arkham Horror that cost you $50 to $70. I don't know what it retails these days for. If people are going to second guess it if it's going to cost that much. Like, am I really going to like this game if it's like $60, $70? Now I have to wait till payday, and then you're hoping that it's going to be good.
Yeah, that price mark can really hinder you. I can't remember the amount of times that my wife or I have picked up Agricola, seen that price tag, and just been, nope, put it down, put it back,
exactly.
Walk away slowly.
Exactly. And like, if you, okay, I'm just using Love Letters as an example because I'm familiar with it, but if someone says, oh yeah, I really enjoyed that game the other night when I played it at game night, I'll go pick it up because it's only $14 or $12, and it's like, that's not a risk. Okay, there's a bit of a risk because I could buy 4 or 5 filler games when I could have just bought one big game. So you see what I'm saying? It's just like there's a lot of incentive to buy filler games, and I think that these gaming companies are smart because there's incentive to buy the smaller games. If you're looking at it from pure numbers, we could sit here and talk about business and. I don't want to get so techie about it.
There's even board game companies that are coming out now that are focusing mainly on the filler game or the micro game, as they call it now. I think General Nonsense Games is one of those, and like their whole mission is just to get a game out there that's not overly complicated and isn't going to be slowed down by the rules.
I agree. I'm pretty sure that this is, I don't want to say the way of the future, but it will help keep many companies afloat. And I think that if these companies are smart, they'd invest a good portion of their resources into making these filler games. One of the things we haven't talked about, filler games are really great for kids too. Most filler games.
Well, yeah, I mean, and they're, again, it's normally focused more towards like something cutesy like Penguins and Fish, or even like I remember games growing up, games like Don't Spill the Beans or Cooties or games of those sort, and I remember playing those with my cousins when they were growing up, and they loved those games, and they were quick. They were like maybe 20, 30 minutes at the most. I
mean, we're talking about kids here and filler games. I mean, let's face it, kids' attention spans are not great, and I know our kids are kind of that way, and they're in high school, and they're still not attention spans because, we used to call it back when we were young the MTV generation. But it still is kind of that way with the way movies are edited and TVs are edited. The attention span of, I think even you could argue the general public's attention span is short.
Yeah, the general public definitely has a concept of instant gratification.
Sure.
They want something, they want it cheap, and they want it now.
Right.
They don't want to have to sit around for 2 or 3 or 4 hours for something. And that's, I think, that niche that filler games fills.
I'm glad you said that because that is right on, I think, with explaining about filler games. But what do you believe we're going to see, do you think?
I think that we're going to see a definite influx of filler games this year. I just hope that we don't end up with an oversaturation, because we might have one company that's doing one game and we might have another company that's doing the exact same game with a different theme.
Right.
And I mean, that's happened before in the past.
Right.
But
well, I had backed a game. Wow, I can't remember the name of this company. It wasn't a company. It was a guy who lived in Ventura, California. And he had this game. It was a cyberpunk game, and it had dice. It was a dice rolling game, and you had a little square in the middle of the table, and you were putting those dice on the ends of it, and you would build these dice, and it would be like 12 dice long on each side of this square that was supposed to be the main frame of a computer. It's a little bit like, I'm trying to think of the name, Android Netrunner, as far as that feel. Like you were going to block with some ice, or you were trying to, and it was all done with these designer dice, and the dice looked beautiful. And he didn't get enough backers because I don't think he did it quite right, the advertising, and it was on Kickstarter.
Well, that, and I think Cyberpunk is one of those themes. It's either you love it or you have no clue about it, and it's a deterrent for you.
Right, and Cyberpunk, I think, is not utilized enough. I really believe that theme is amazing if you do it right, like Blade Runner and whatnot.
Well, outside of like Android and Android Netrunner, besides like the RPGs like Shadowrun, or I think it's Future 2025 or something like that.
Right.
There really isn't Cyberpunk, and I mean, it needs to be used more.
Right, I have sort of dabbled in making my own game in that cyberpunk theme, but given the time frames of doing the podcast and playing games and dealing with the family and work, I just haven't got around to it. But boy, it would be really cool to have a game that had that. You're in a Blade Runner world where you're out. Cool theme. But this, like I said, this game that I backed, and he said, I'll be back, but he hasn't because he's young and he's got stuff to do. But that was another one where I think the ones that do well are the ones that aren't just card. I mean, the card one, I think that, of course, Love Letter is just, what is it, like 12 cards or something? Or
12
8
cards. And
is it 12 or 14 cards?
Wooden blocks.
Yeah, and tiny little wood cubes. And that it sort of broke the mold, I think, with filler games, because most filler games, you need more components than just 12 cards. Now, the great thing about that game is it travels well. I mean, I could take that to the airport and play a few games and be great.
And there's other games that travel well like that. Like I said earlier, there's a pocket edition of Hey, That's My Fish.
Sure.
You can get the normal big box edition, or you can get the little travel pocket edition, which is the one that I carry with me.
Sure. One of the things that I would hope, okay, this is my hope for the future as far as the filler game department goes, I would hope that they would continue doing designer dice, because like Bears, that game that has the dice, a really cool dice, and Zombie dice, they have all these really cool dice with the different, I think they're laser cut, I think, actually.
I'm not sure how they make them, but they're really high quality.
Yeah, they're really high quality. And I keep hoping that they'll continue with the dice, because dice is always a very wonderful tactile part of gaming, I think.
Well, there's even games out there where all you need are a set of 5 or 6 dice, whether it's something like Yahtzee or there's one that my wife and I used to play all the time called Zilch. I'm not quite sure on the rules, they're escaping me, but it's basically you're rolling dice and you're trying to get certain sets of dice. Right.
Dice, I love them. I love dice. Although Yahtzee, it's funny because they're like, if you're like that, you'll like Yahtzee. Yahtzee, it needs more to it for me to be played again.
Yeah, one filler game, and it has kind of a dice aspect to it, but they're not actually dice. It's called Pass the Pigs. I don't know if you've ever heard of it.
I've heard of it.
I remember being, I think it was like 8 or 10 years old and getting that one year for Christmas, and I looked at it and it was like, this is really weird. There's no dice, but there's a set of pigs, and you roll the pigs, and based on how the pigs land on the table, you score points or you lose points or your turn's over. And it's another one of those press your luck style games.
Well, one of the games as sort of like breaks that mold is a game I have, and you could even argue it bleeds over into the wargaming genre. It's called Ace of Aces, and I don't know if I've showed you that before.
Yeah, you have.
And what's cool about it, for those of you who don't know what the game is, 2 books, you get, and your opponent gets a book. And it's 2 players, and it's basically a World War I airplane fighting game. And you'll turn a page, and the other guy will turn his page, and then it'll actually show up on a little drawing of where your airplane is, an illustration, I should say. And it will say, okay, I want to do a loop. Okay, so I'll go to page 45, and then the other guy will go, okay, I go to 42, I want to do a move where I'm turning sharply and trying to shoot. And so you go through and you turn, and then when you shoot each other, you roll a die and you take a little chit off of his tail or maybe his wings or something. And let me tell you, that game I've taken on cruise with me once, and that was we had a blast doing that game, my brother and I. That's another very unique game, and it blows my mind that someone actually came up with how to actually make those books work. This is amazing, but that's another one that's kind of unique. Now, have you played Hive?
I've played the Android application for Hive, but I haven't actually played the actual game.
Right.
I'm very intrigued by it, and I think that it's one that I might be able to get my wife behind, even though it's bugs.
Because that is kind of... I'm surprised that one hasn't won any awards, because that one's really unique. It basically is, for those of you who have not seen it, basically it's like chess, really. I mean, you could boil it down to just being another version of chess, really, without there being a board, of course.
Yeah, it's very abstract, and there's all these different bugs, and each bug has a different way that they can move, and they can only move that way.
Right. Like the beetle can move on top of the other bugs, and then there's... I think the spider can only move a certain way, and you just have to make sure that your queen isn't surrounded. Once one queen is surrounded, the other player wins. So it's basically, there's quite a bit of strategy to it, really.
And the Android app that's out was really nice because it's almost like 2 separate games by itself. There's one part of it that's the single player game where it basically just teaches you how all the insects move and how every one of them moves.
It's kind of like a tutorial.
And then once you're done with that puzzle version, you can take it online and play against other people or pass and play. And I mean, it's a really interesting implementation of the game.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I did download it for my Android, and I did play the single player tutorial kind of deal where you go through, and I was hoping that there would have been a single player, but there's not. It's a 2-player implementation.
I think I would need to get a tablet to play that with another person, though, because just passing a phone back and forth, phones are kind of small. And
Sure.
But wait, we have questions and answers too.
Now we're going to move on to questions and answers. One of the things, and we usually, because since we're not a big known podcast yet, we haven't gotten questions. So what I'll do is, I have it myself, Hans, we have gone on to BGG and gotten some questions and answers, and one of them that I found that sounded kind of interesting to me is, one of the guys was saying, hey, I'd rather be spending my money on other games or additional add-ons to my existing games. Why should I be investing my time and money on filler games? You could technically argue the other way around too. I mean, why would you buy a add-on or an extension or whatever you call it, can buy a filler game and get a whole new game? You could argue both sides of that question.
Well, I think that the answer to this question really stems back to who you're playing with. If you're playing with a group and you have these games and you love those games, I mean, my group from back in Pennsylvania where I'm from absolutely adored Nightfall. So any chance that I got, I would get more expansions to build and grow that game. But if you have a larger group, say 6, 8, 10 people, maybe having 1 or 2 filler games for people who can't get into the game that you're playing because it only sits so many people might not be a bad thing to do.
Right. It really depends on the person. Because like the industry or the hobby in itself, it's to each his own, really. I mean, what fits the bill for you or your group. And personally for me, I know this is a personal thing for myself, I don't usually like to get add-ons or the game... What's the name?
Expansion?
Expansion. God, I can't think of that word today. That's weird. Anyway, I don't usually like expansions because I would rather be spending my money on something new or something different so that I can expand my library. Because right now I'm kind of new to the hobby, so I'm trying to build that library. So I have a tendency not to. Now, there are certain things that I will go ahead and get, like my favorite game. I'm sure you've not heard this before, is Mage Knight. Mage Knight is my mistress, as Han says. That's his mistress, is, Settlers of Catan, I think is what he said. Mine is Mage Knight. I love that game, so I bought all the expansions for it, because I play it so much that I'm loving it. I'm going to try to expand that love, right? So,
and that's kind of how I feel about Nightfall. I mean, I've pulled it out a couple of times at a couple of game nights out here, but I played it so many times back east, and I had such a great time with it. My acquisition disorder is kind of kicking in, and I have to get all the expansions for it, and AEG just keeps bringing out more and more and more. So,
I've never played it, and to hear you talk about it with such love and passion, you piqued my interest.
It's definitely one of the better deck builders out there. It takes the basic mechanics that are in Dominion, and it adds what's called a chain mechanic. Whereas with Dominion, where you're pulling out cards you're buying cards based on how much money you have and putting only one into play, with this chain mechanic, each card has a certain color, and then there's 2 colors underneath that color on the moons that are on the card. And then you can chain cards together as long as the big moon on their card matches one of the 2 smaller moons on the card you play before it.
Right.
And I mean, without having a visual example right out in front of me, I mean, it's kind of difficult to explain, but if you can get online and look at a couple of Nightfall cards, it's really simple.
Yeah, and let me tell you, I would really be interested in playing this. In fact, recently, Jenna, my wife, has been interested in that one and Android Netrunner. She's been kind of interested in those, and whether we get it or not, it's a whole nother story, but I would definitely like to try it. So next time we break some games out, bring it again, and we'll see if we can fit in some time with it.
I always bring Nightfall with me.
So anyways, and so on that note, we are going to say goodbye, and we really appreciate you stopping by. And Ken, thank you for coming.
Thank you for having me. I hope to come back soon.
So join us next time where we talk again about board games, the board gaming world, what we're playing, and all the good stuff that you've come to expect from Huff-In-Stuff Podcast. See you later.
Thank you for joining the Huff-In-Stuff Podcast. We hope you enjoyed listening and hope you can tune in next time. Huff-In-Stuff is brought to you by Southwestern Valley Gaming Group at swvalleygamingsgroup.webs.com. You can visit us on our webpage at huffandstuffpodcast.webs.com. That is HUFFNSTUFF podcast.webs.com. We love to hear from you, so leave us questions, feedback, or just say hi. As always, keep on smiling and game on.